Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Learning from Experience, Making Leadership Development Intentional, Not Incidental, hosted by HRDQ and presented by Dr. Mina Wilson and Anand Shan-Rashaka. My name is Sarah, and I will moderate the webinar for today. The webinar is going to be about an hour, and if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type those questions into that chat or questions box. We'll be getting these questions at the end of the presentation or in an email if we do run out of time. I would like to welcome Mina and Anand. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, welcome everybody. Anand, my colleague, is based in Singapore, and I'm currently based at Ashoka University near Delhi, India. We're very pleased that you're taking the time out of your busy day to be with us. Next, a brief note about the Center for Creative Leadership. This was founded by H. Smith Richardson, whose picture you see right there. That family made its fortunes off of the Vicks VapoRub product, which many of you might be familiar with, and that was concocted in a pharmacy in Greensboro, and that's where the CCL headquarters is. Fortunes went sky high due to an influenza epidemic right after World War I. But this was a smart man, and he realized that any organization has ups and it has downs, and he was very convinced from the beginning that it would take creative leadership to ride the ups and ride the downs of business cycles. And so that is why there was a gleam in his eye about doing research related to creative leadership and helping develop creative leaders. And you know what? At the time, I would like to share with you that at the time CCL started in 1970, there was just one book in the Greensboro Public Library on leadership. And of course, now you can't walk into a bookstore without seeing, just literally stacks of books on leadership. Next, and one of our favorite slides is this one in which this amazing H. Smith Richardson Sr. said, "It takes boldness to invest in programs of uncertain potentialities, but it is out of such support that some of the greatest discoveries have been made." And so today, what we are doing is taking you through a bold and pioneering research project that led to profound insights about how people can grow, learn, and develop and really become effective leaders. And then, of course, we package that knowledge into the Experience Explorer card deck, and you are going to be seeing some of how to use that deck too. So next, really the question on the table for all of us is more and better leadership talent more quickly. And with your roles and responsibilities in the matrix and global organizations, I'm sure that that is top of mind, not just for you, but also for your top leaders. Talent management is becoming more and more a strategic priority. So given that, let's start, next slide please, by getting information about what you are currently doing in your organization. So we are about to launch a poll, and this is to get a sense of what approach your organization is most likely to use to develop leadership talent. So please go ahead. Option A, send managers to leadership development programs. B is assign mentors, coaches. C is create special assignments that enable action learning. D is use a combination, and other. And so go ahead, and the poll is open. So go ahead and cast your vote, please. Yes, I see we're waiting for a few more votes to come in. We're at about 73% of votes. A few more. And here we go. So we have about over 80% of the people voted. So let's just take a look at what those results show. And I like those results, particularly because at least a half of you say that you use a combination of A, B, and C, and I'll tell you in a minute why that one works. But it's also interesting to see that a full 30% say that the best way to develop leaders is by sending them to a leadership development program. So this topic of why what is really needed is a combination of A, B, and C is the topic that we're going to delve into in this webinar. And the agenda today, next please, is to convey a message to you that you can then convey to all the people who join your organization. And that message is that everybody can learn from experiences, and that's critical to becoming a top-level leader, and that there is research that tells us which experiences and lessons are the most essential for your managers to pursue. And then we're going to look at a card deck, which actually there are, in that card deck, you have a portfolio of experiences, 52 of them, and a portfolio of lessons, 42 of them. But we are actually going to simplify that down so you can break them into chunks and guide your people on which experiences to pursue and which lessons to pursue. And what's interesting is when we do that, you'll see the connection with what we call 70-20-10, which is challenging assignments, developmental relationships, and also coursework and training. If you have questions, I'm going to invite you to continue, and that way we can catch them as we go along. And if we don't catch those as we go along, we'll certainly pause at the end, and we will answer those questions at that point. So, next, the issue really is, how can we make leadership development intentional, not incidental? And together with that, what we want to do is make learning from experience intentional, not incidental. And we are on to that answer, and I think that you will enjoy what we're about to share. They assume that they're going to be listening to something dry and boring, but I think you will become engaged with this. So moving on, next, Sarah, where did 70-20-10 really come from, and what is it that the research tells us? I think what is most important for us to know before we go any further is how familiar you are with this concept of 70-20-10. that will help us shape the rest of what we say in this webinar. And so we're going to open up the next poll. And in that poll, we are going to ask you whether you are familiar with the 2010 guideline. And so you get to select just one, either that you're not at all familiar, or that you're somewhat familiar, or that you are familiar, or that you are very familiar. So please go ahead and select one right now. Thank you. Sarah, I think we're ready to close the poll. So this is actually, in a sense, good news in the sense that many of you say, 50% of you say that you are not all that familiar. And then good to know that there are people who are somewhat familiar, and some who are very familiar. Wherever you are on that spectrum, you are going to get something out of this. What I want to point out before we go any further is link that 70-20-10 to the first poll. So that 70 means creating challenging assignments that enable people to learn. That 20 means creating developmental relationships that enable people to learn. And that 10 means sending people into coursework and training so that they can learn. So that is a broad outline of 70-20-10, and I'm going to share more right now with you as to where the 70-20-10 comes from, who made this up. So Sarah, can we move to the next one? Next slide, please. Sarah?
Are they moving, Mina?
Mine's not. Oh, there we go. There we go. Pardon that, please. So look, this slide gives you some sense of the substantial work that has gone in to taking that 70-20-10 and building on it so that we can now say how you should guide your managers. And so this research really started all the way back in the 1980s, and that's when, as you can see, a lot of work was concentrated in the US, and what managers were asked at that time is to look back at their lifetime of experience. So this is senior managers in major organizations, and they were asked to reflect on what were the key experiences that had taught them the most important leadership lessons that they knew. And by analyzing reams of data, that's where we got the 70-20-10. 70 standing once more for challenging assignments, 20 for relationships with bosses, mentors, and others, and the 10 for coursework and training. Now, as professionals, you will be very happy to hear that we were actually able to drill down on that. So that gray shaded box that's at the top, we started another round of research and extended it into China, Singapore, and India. And this was after I moved to in 2007. And what we found actually extended the findings that had previously come out and helped drive us deeper. So next, from this round of research, we were able to find, this is a pretty important slide, and in a minute we're going to simplify it. Here are all of the 15 experiences that people need in their careers so that they can develop into completely competent leaders. You just don't need one or two experiences. You need a whole portfolio of experiences. And if you think this is intimidating, what you'll find is we do have definitions for each one of them, and those definitions will be sent out to you. But moving on, next, Sarah. What we also find is that they can be grouped. So here they are. Turnaround, increase, move, new initiatives, stakeholder engagement, cultural crossing. These are examples of challenging assignments, and basically most of leadership is learned through a challenging assignment. The 20 is the support and the challenges you get from your bosses and superiors and what you learn by watching them. You actually do learn from working with difficult people, and you learn from feedback and coaching, and that's 20% of where your leadership learning comes from. And then 10% comes from coursework and training. And so of course that's where, you know, we go back to that first poll and ask why coursework and training is still the preferred method for almost 30% of the people who answered of the assignments, of the relationships, and the coursework and training that makes for creating highly capable leaders. And so of course at this point you can ask, well, what are these experiences on the right hand side hanging out there, personal experiences, and then the 4 other types of experiences underneath that. In the original research and in the follow-on research that was done in Asia Pacific, those experiences were excluded from the 70-20-10 for one particular reason, and that is people learn from personal experiences such as spiritual experiences, divorces, hardships, career, you know, just moving across the country, and you can't really inflict a personal experience from an organization's point of view, and so it isn't included in the 70-20-10 guideline. And similarly, people also learn from crises. They learn from having to face ethical dilemmas and deal with mistakes and career setbacks, but those are adverse situations or hardships, and you know, you can't really inflict that on a person because it's good for them. And so researchers in the 80s and then researchers fast forward to the Asia Pacific research, we all decided that those did not belong in the guideline. So moving from there, next, what I'm going to say at this point is that everything that comes after this is actually in a white paper, Grooming Top Leaders, and you will also be getting a copy of this. And so most of the rest of the material will be covered, and you can refer to that. Next. Now, I was personally a part of the team that analyzed all that 40 years of research that was done both in North America, included some organizations from Europe, and then went into China, India, and Singapore. And the best part of it is that we discovered that across all those countries, there are 5 experiences only that contribute to 80% of leadership learning. And those are bosses and superiors, turnarounds, increases in job scope, horizontal moves, and new initiatives. And, you know, if you're not really familiar with those terms, like I said, there is a handout describing and defining each one of those experiences and gives you examples. So you can always go back to that. But hey, this is big time news that if you want to groom people for positions of senior leadership, acquaint them with these experiences and let them pursue them. Moving on, Sarah, next. We also found that in every country, there were 2 additional experiences that seemed to make a big difference. And it's not very clear on what are the reasons why these 2 experiences differ from country to country. And once you have an open discussion, there's a lot of curiosity about it. In this webinar, we will just focus on 2. And for example, if you look at the USA flag, you'll see that the 2 experiences that are most cited after the top 5 in the U.S. by U.S. managers are ethical dilemmas and mistakes. And that doesn't necessarily, it could mean that U.S. managers are just more open to saying that they have made a mistake and learning from it, and that perhaps in other countries people are just not as willing to say they made a mistake. We don't really know. Similarly, I'm going to take India as an example, and it was a big surprise. You'll see the India flag under personal experiences and crossing cultures, and there again it was a mystery to the research team as to why personal experiences mattered so much to Indian managers as a source of leadership learning. And for crossing cultures, of course, we have more of an explanation, and that is because when the research was being done, India was in an expansionist and growth mode internationally, seeing life as an expatriate in other cultures, and they were learning from that. But I hope that it makes sense to you to see that, you know, having clarity about which are the 5 experiences that matter the most and which are other experiences that should supplement those top 5 experiences is really quite helpful if you're responsible for guiding a manager's growth and development. So with that, let's move on. And what we'd also like to say is that it's not just important to give people experiences. It is also, and this is actually it's almost the last slide here. It's what are you learning from those experiences? And I would like to point out at this point that very often when you go to an executive education program or when you go to undertake coursework, most of what you learn in that formal program is about the world of work. So in other words, if you look at the world of work, it says attention to strategy, operations, and culture, skills, and perspectives to get work done. But really, from those experiences, 2 other domains of lessons that are learned have to do with the world of self and world of people. And of course, more recently, all of you have heard about EQ, which is really about managing relationships and understanding them with greater insight. So there you have it. World of self is thoughts, emotions, actions, mindset, and attitudes to manage oneself, and interpersonal and social skills to connect with people. And so as developers of people, if you are giving people experiences, it's important to make sure that the lessons that they are learning are balanced across these three domains. So with that, next, the next slide shows, so shows this question, and I'm going to pause for just 1 minute before handing it over to Anand to take you through the Experience Explorer deck. And if you will, into your questions box, type in some responses to how can we help managers get the experiences that they need to develop themselves. How can we help managers get the experiences that they need to develop themselves? And then Sarah, if I'll ask you to read out some of those questions, please.
Let's see. Janet says, challenge them with assignments beyond their grace level or position.
Okay. Good one.
Provide
Good one.
guidance and examples of ways others have developed as a springboard.
Perfect. Role modeling. Yep.
Yep.
Works.
Mentoring, informal and informal.
Got you.
Plan and allow leaders to move from function to function and levels.
Well, look, those are just marvelous examples, and I think you can tell from the examples that people instinctively, the combination tells you that it's just a combination of assignments, relationships, role models, and then some amount of coursework and training, but coursework and training may not be as important as a standalone. It is important, but not as important just on its own. So appreciate those answers, and thank you. And handing it off now to Anand to take us forward.
Well, thank you, Meena. Good day, everyone. Just as Meena has mentioned here, the Experience Explorer is a very valuable tool that you can use to provide some kind of intentionality to what experiences you provide people and how people can learn from those experiences. I'm basically going to spend a few minutes taking you through the Experience Explorer card deck and how it can actually be used. So moving on to the next slide, which basically describes what's there in the Experience Explorer card deck. We have a few instruction cards, and there are what we call experience cards, 52 of them, and then there are lesson cards, 42 of them. So again, just to reinforce the point that the Experience Explorer card deck is all about providing some kind of intentionality to learning from experience. And to do this, we have something that we call the 4S model, which you will see on the next slide. So the 4S model basically works like this. You set objectives, then you sort and select from the Experience Explorer card deck. There is an element of sharing built in, and it ends by strategizing for the way forward. So that's the brief 4S model. Set objectives, sort and select, share, and strategize. So I'm going to take you through these 4 steps. On the next slide, you would see something called set objectives. So this is what you really need to do when you're running an Experience Explorer session. It's very important to clarify both for yourself and for your stakeholders what exactly is the intention of this session. And to do that, we recommend what we call as one of two paths. One is what we call the experience path, which works really well when you have a very diverse participant group that you're facing, that you're working with. If you're an organization where you really don't have any specific competency model or leadership framework yet, again, this kind of works well. The lesson path kind of works well when you have people from the same organization or people who belong to a function in the audience, and you have a particular competency model which the group of people who have gathered there actually subscribe to. So it's a great way to start off the session, have an opportunity to actually sit down, do some planning in terms of what skills participants want to develop. So moving on to the next slide is where we talk about the sort and the select part of the forest model. What I'm showing you here, the picture that you see is what happens face to face. The group of people who are actually sorting and selecting some of the cards. So if we move on to the next point, what basically happens is the participants pick up, shuffle the 52 blue card decks, which is basically the experience cards. And they sort this into two stacks, which is the next step. The two stacks that they sorted to are experiences that they have had and experiences that they have not had. So this takes usually about 5 to 7 minutes for them to go through all of those 52 cards, and it's just a question of sorting them into I've had this experiences, I've not had this experiences. So now what they have in front of them are basically two stacks. Now we move on to the third step, where they actually pick up the stack that says, here are experiences that I have had. And we kind of force them to select 3 cards, only 3 cards which talk about memorable experiences that they have had. And when we say memorable, we usually say, pick 3 cards that have shaped how you behave as a leader today. So we're not going to be able to do this with all 52 cards given the virtual audience that we have, but we're going to kind of help you get a sense of that experience in the next slide. So what we have for you are about 20 of those experiences on screen. I'm going to invite you to look through these 20 experiences and select out of these just 2 experiences that have shaped how you behave as a leader today. So go ahead, look at your screens for about a minute and pick out 2 really memorable experiences for you. We're going to pause for about half a minute to do this. Okay, great. I think it's time to move ahead to the next slide. I hope you all had a chance to pick 2 experiences. So moving on to the next slide, you'd actually see that the experiences that you have had, that you have picked, actually fall into one of these 15 types of experiences. On the next slide, what you can do is, if you picked a particular experience, go ahead and find out which category that it was. So here's an example. I kind of picked E16, which is about creating a new product or service. And my second pick was E6, which was all about cultural crossing. So I have two categories for myself now. One is cultural crossing. The other one has to do with new initiatives. So go ahead and make a note for yourself. What are those two experiences? Broad categories of experiences. It could be bosses and superiors. It could be, increase in job scope, or it could be horizontal move. It could be any of those for yourself. So what this basically does is the sort and select. It basically gives participants a very memorable experience because they actually move down their memory lane and get to reflect on what has brought them here to where they are. So moving on to the next slide, we now zero in and pick one of those two memorable experiences. So go ahead and out of the two experiences that you have selected, go ahead and pick one memorable experience. And we make participants now go through that lesson cards. There are 42 of them. They go through that and they get to pick what they learned from that experience. So we basically say select 3 lessons that you have learned from that experience that you use as a leader today. So we're going to again mirror this with our audience here today. So on the next slide, you'll actually see a list of 16 leadership lessons, skills, competencies. So here's what you need to do. Go ahead, pick one of those two memorable experiences that you had, and from that, look at this table of 16 lessons and pick 3 skills that you learned from that experience. So my pick in this case is, in terms of creating a new service and product. If you recall, that was one of my picks as a very memorable experience. I learned a lot about communicating effectively. I gained a lot of confidence, especially when I helped launch a new brand. And I also learned a lot about managing bosses and superiors and managing their expectations. So I kind of picked lessons 7, 10, and 16. That's mine. Take a few minutes to pick what's yours. You might want to make a note of the lesson numbers also. That's the L01 to L16, because we'll be referring to that in the next slide. So now if you've had your choice of leadership lessons, go ahead and make a note for yourself which category, which world of lessons does this fall into. Did you pick up a skill about the world of work, or was it about how you work with people, or was it more about how you work with yourself, how you lead yourself? So which of these 3 worlds do your skills fall under? So I'm just going to pause for a moment here so that you can make a note of these classifications. So what you would find is that really good leaders actually have skills that fall into all the 3 worlds. You need to be really good at managing work while maintaining relationships with people, but at the same time managing oneself. Average leaders or poor leaders would be good at probably 1 or 2 of these worlds, but they might not be skilled enough to work on all of those 3 bullets. Now again, the time, it takes about 3 to 5 minutes for people to make these selections, but it gives them a chance to go down memory lane and basically discover what they have learned and what has brought them here. So this brings us to the end of the second part of the 4S model, which is sort and select. On the next slide, we're going to talk about the third part of the 4S model, which is called share. So in a face-to-face Experience Explorer session, what really happens is that we get people in the room out of their seats and do a quick networking among people in the room, circulate around, meet other people, and share one of their memorable experiences and what they took away, the lessons that they learned from that experience. And we invite the listener to probe a bit more deeper and try to understand why that particular experience was important to the person sharing it. This rises the energy level in the room, and in the next slide you'll actually see that when we did this at various workshops, the reactions of people when they went through the share session. Sarah, can we move on to the next slide? So, what some of the participants remarked that they thought that they were the only person who had that particular experience, but then talking around the room, the feeling was that I'm not the only one who's had this experience, but a lot of other people have had similar shared experiences. People also share about how it helps relate to others in a much deeper manner, that they knew something about that person and the experiences that the person had been through that they had not known before. I would also like to invite Meena at this point. Meena, do you want to comment a bit more on how the magic actually happens in the room when people share their experiences?
Yes, yes. What I'd like to say is that I have actually used these cards in multiple scenarios, where you can even have up to 100 people in the room. And the room goes really quiet when they are sorting and selecting, and that goes very fast. But wow, the energy in the room goes, you can hardly recover people back, because what you have done is, in a way, trick them into remembering something that was very important to them. And then you get them to talk about it, and they can barely stop. But what's neat about it is that simply by circulating and sharing their experience, they also learn how much they can learn just by listening to other people. And so just the sharing actually magnifies the learning from other people's experience, and people just love it because they enjoy listening to other people's stories, and there are just so many of them.
Thank you, Meena. Thank you for sharing that. So what happens here is, as facilitators, once the audience in the room has had a chance to share, we also introduce them to the research behind the Experience Explorer, which is basically what Meena shared in the first half of the webinar, the studies that were done and how these experiences actually, the categories that they fall into. Sarah, if you move on to the next slide, you would be able to see how some of these experiences actually map into 70, 20, 10, something that you just went through. So these symbols that you see here on your screens, these symbols are also present on each of the Experience Explorer cards. So people would be able to relate a particular experience that they have picked and see where it falls. Does it fall under challenging assignments? Is it about working with people who have developmental relationship? Is it about coursework and training? Is it about going through hardships and learning from them? Or are there some other personal experiences? A similar thing on the next slide with the 3 domains of lessons. So each of those lesson cards has a symbol that speaks to whether the lesson, whether the skill is in the world of work, the world of people, or the world of self. So this kind of, let me remind you, brings us to the end of the 3rd step of the 4S model. We are moving on to the 4th step, which is basically the strategize step, which is on the next slide. So in the strategize step, participants move on from a focus on past experiences in terms of what they have had to a focus on the future in terms of what do I need to make my next move? What do I need to develop? What experiences do I need? And what capabilities do I need to develop? So we invite people to do this, those of you who are participating, by looking at the next slide. So where we again have the list of 20 experiences up for you. So go ahead and select one experiences that you believe you would benefit most from in the next 6-month time frame. So we're going to pause here for half a minute to allow you an opportunity to select one experience that you think you would benefit most from in the next 6 months. So go ahead, make your pick. And we will move on to the next slide, which has a list of lessons, something that you saw earlier, but now you bring in a future lens to select 2 skills that you would like to develop from the experience that you just selected. So let's say you selected, living and working in another country as an experience that you would like to undergo in the next 6 months. This is a chance for you to say, as I look to get an opportunity to live and work in another country, what are the skills that I really want to develop as a result of that experience? So you can see this is where the intentionality part comes in terms of setting goals and saying, here's an experience I'm aspiring to, and here is what I'm looking to actually take away from that experience. So let's summarize what we have learned, what we have talked about in the next slide, which basically lays out the entire 4S model for you. So in using the Experience Explorer cards, either for yourself or with a team of people, you start by setting objectives in terms of what you want to take away from the session. In terms of the process of the session, you do a sort and select from the experience and the lesson cards. There is an element of sharing, which is the 3rd step, and an element of planning, which is the 4th step called strategize. I'm going to leave that up for a few minutes. The Experience Explorer session, a typical session would take about 60 minutes to facilitate, and you get to take back something really memorable, go down memory lane, and also plan for the future in these 60 minutes. So moving on to the next slide. So we're going to open up for questions just soon, but before that I want to move on to the next slide, which has a summary of again what we've just covered over the last 45 minutes. So what we really know is that there are powerful experiences matter for leadership development, and it's critically important to actually look back on those experiences and reflect on lessons that we learned from those experiences. These lessons could take various forms. They could be shifts in knowledge, they could be shifts in skill level, attitudes, behaviors could shift, or more fundamentally, you can even see a shift in values happen. On the next slide, we look back to what we talked about at the beginning of this presentation by saying that if we take a little bit effort, we can, and it's very easy to make learning from experience intentional, not incidental, not accidental. And the Experience Explorer cards basically provide a great value and a great resource to make learning from experience intentional. We also have a few other resources which are talked about in the next slide. So there are a couple of books on how one could use experience to develop leadership talent, and there is a blog, experience-driven-development.com, which we would invite you to visit. A few more resources on the next slide has to do with Mina's book, Developing Tomorrow's Leaders Today, which talks about leadership development for the Indian leader. There are, of course, the Lessons of Experience book, which is the classic book done in the 80s, which talks about the whole series of research. Breaking the Glass Ceiling, which is about developmental experiences for women leaders. High Flyers, which is about how do you develop, what experiences are crucial to developing high potentials. So these are some of the resources that we have for you to use. And on the next slide, of course, talking about the Experience Explorer card deck itself. We have used it in different ways, and Mina and I, as creators of this Experience Explorer card deck, we are very interested in hearing from you. So if you have a chance to get your hands on an Experience Explorer card deck, go ahead, use it, do write back to us and tell us how the experience went. Sarah will tell you more about how you can get the Experience Explorer card decks and the facilitator's guide and the other solution set that go with it. Over to you, Sarah.
All right, perfect. Thank you. We're going to say something, Mina?
Well, do we have time for a few questions?
We do, actually. Attendees, go ahead, submit those questions into that chat box. And actually, for attending today, we are actually offering a 20% discount on the actual set. So you can go over to HRDQstore.com for more information, or if you would like to purchase. So let's get to questions. Our first question is coming from Matt. How long does an EE session take?
Over to you, Anand.
Okay, yeah, but thank you for the question. A typical EE session would take 60 to 90 minutes. We would, recommend 90 minutes just to make sure that people have enough time to share and do it at a slower pace, at a more moderate pace. So 60 to 90 minutes, recommended 90 minutes.
All right, wonderful, thank you. And let's see, our next question is coming from Tina. In which situations can EE be used? Is it recommended for individuals or small groups or large groups?
I'll take that one. Tina, so what's interesting is that it lends itself to a variety of uses, and I have found that coaches love it because a coach just picks up one set and says, this helps me to use it with a coachee, and I can guide them to thinking about which experiences they've had and where their gaps are. But I have also found that other than using it to plan your own career, if you get a group of people, like 5 or 6 in a team, that team, even when they have been working with each other for a long time, sometimes don't have that knowledge about each other. And so it becomes a team-building exercise. And for an organization, of course, you would have to have a senior level person endorse it. We have had people say that we want to develop a talent management strategy, and how do we incorporate this knowledge into laying out a map that people can use to become accountable for guiding their own careers. We haven't seen that use to the extent that I would like to see it. When Anand said that it takes about 60 to 90 minutes, that's to give people, either at an individual level or a team level, an experience of the Experience Explorer deck. Some of these other interventions would take longer. I hope that answers your question.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. Moving on, our next question is coming from Mike. Do I need to be certified to use Experience Explorer?
I can take that. Mike, you need to be certified to use Experience Explorer, but we strongly recommend that you get what's called an Experience Explorer Facilitator's Guide, which is available along with the card deck, because that would talk you through, that would provide you insights into the 4S model, and also some of our experiences as facilitators having used the Experience Explorer card deck.
All right, great. Looks like we have time just for one more question, and this last question is coming from Allie. When we use EE, are there any best practices that you recommend?
There are several, and I think to take that one, what would be the fairest thing to do, Sarah, is to send the answer to that one out to everybody. It is in the facilitator's guide what those best practices are, but there are quite a few of them, and so maybe what we need to do is just send it out to everybody post this session. Example would be allowing enough time, like 60 to 90 minutes. Another example would be to have each person have their own deck, because people just really can sort and select, and then you just distribute it and then collect them back up. Another is to give people enough elbow room so that they don't get the card decks mixed up, so that because otherwise it's just miserable to try to sort them out. So you remind people to keep their own sorting within their own space, and hand out rubber bands so they can rubber band their selection. So those are examples of some practices that make the session work more effectively and efficiently. So thank you for that question too.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. Did you want to say something else?
Nope, back to you, Sarah.
Okay. All right, thank you. Those are some great questions. And I know we probably didn't get time for everybody's questions, but we're actually going to email those out to you probably about like mid-next week with those answered questions. So Meena and Anand, would you just like to add any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Oh, I feel very passionate about the importance of assisting people to learn from experience, because I feel like that is one of the deepest way of learning how to become a leader. So thank you very much for attending this session, and I hope that you got something valuable out of it. Over to you, Anand.
I just want to echo what Meena said, that learning from experience is a very powerful thing, and we learn from experience almost every day. How can we be more intentional about it is the key. So thank you all for joining us and being a part of this. Thank you very much.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much again. And that is all the time we have for today. So we appreciate your time, and we hope you found today's webinar informative. Thanks.